Hey, welcome back to my channel and happy Halloween to all of you guys out there. And since it's Halloween, I figured why not I make a horror video? Well, I don't think this video is going to be that scary, but I think my opinions and controversial takes in this video will scare the fuck out of you. So good luck. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about horror games. Now, video games have been trying to scare us since the early 80s, while the influential haunted horror house Atari game, one of the earliest survival horror games, presented its horror scares through a mix of heavily pixelated ghosts and spiders that weren't really that frightening at all. It was indicative of where the genre would go one day. With another push thanks to titles such as Sweet Homes and Alone in the Dark, the survival horror genre would give birth to some of the most iconic and frightening creations of all time, such as Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Eternal Darkness, Fatal Frame, and Dead Space, to name a few. Today, the genre lives on and continues to evolve every single decade. From interactive horror movies like Until Dawn, Man of Medan, The Query, to first-person experiences beyond comprehension like PT, the survival horror genre continues to prove why it's one of the best mainstream of the industry and why it will always get better from every single decade. So today in this video, we're going to be ranking the top 20 horror games of all time. Now, before I start this video, I just want to say this is just my opinion. If you don't agree with my takes, then let me know your top 20 horror games of all time. Then we can have a serious good discussion in the comments down below. Alright, good, let's start this video. In number 20, I have Dead Space. Many of the best examples of sci-fi horror rely on the terror of the unknown. From Aliens to Event Horizon, sci-fi horror stories often shows us the consequences of going too far and facing something we don't entirely understand. That idea is at the heart of nearly everything that makes Dead Space so brilliant and amazing as a horror game. While the atmosphere of the game and the world-class sound design deserves all the praise and love they've been getting over the years, Dead Space truly distinguishes itself in ways its enemy design influences the combat and the storytelling. You'll never forget the first time you fell for a necromorph playing dead. A shocking moment that assured you that you'd never feel safe playing this game. Whether in a save room or walking down a quiet hallway, what begins as a gory jump scare quickly turns into a deeper feeling of dread for the player that plays the game. When combined with the incredible art and sound design inside the USG Ishimura, makes you feel like you're constantly in danger. Any second the necromorph could pop out of the vent, sneak behind you, or, you know.
I ain't gonna lie, I'm getting cooked.
Number 19, I have Resident Evil 4. There have been many words that have been written about Resident Evil 4 bringing more of an action movie feel to the horror genre and popularizing a more cinematic style that stood in stark contrast to the more methodical survivor horror titles that the original Resident Evil helped popularize. The significance of the game's contribution in that respect can't be overstated. Yet, it's easy to forget that Resident Evil 4 remains a truly terrifying game. In lieu of making you feel utterly helpless and useless, Resident Evil 4 delivers its frights in a series of sequences that test your newfound abilities with overwhelming horrors. You may be able to control your weapons more freely in Resident Evil 4 than you could before, but when you're being chased down by a hulking figure wielding a chainsaw, precision aim is a cold comfort. Number 18, I have Silent Hill 2. Ask any gamer what they remember about the first Silent Hill game and they'll likely say the fog. Granted, the game's fog-filled streets can be partially attributed to the PlayStation's atrocious draw distance, but there's no denying that the effectiveness of making a player feel like they'll never know what's going to be around the next corner. Silent Hill 2 relies a little less on the fog but secures its status as arguably the most intimidating horror game ever made by invoking similar feelings of uncertainty. The game's complex psychological narrative loosens your grip on reality, while the visceral terror creation such as the Pyramid Head ensures that you'll find no comfort in whatever answers you may uncover. Few games have the ability to scare you quite like Silent Hill 2. It lingers in your mind long after the quick scares of other games have settled into a vague memory. In 17, I have Outlast. While Resident Evil and the other early horror hits were appropriately labeled as survival horror, the survival elements in those titles typically revolved around managing limited resources. Even the modern survival games are still largely about item management. The appropriately named Outlast takes a different approach to survival horror. Yes, it deprives you of your resources, your battery-hungry camera is equally parts annoying and your only real weapon in the game. But surviving Outlast is really about finding a way to mentally overcome the game's relentless scares. Some might rightfully ask what's so fun about a game largely consists of hiding and running through the dark, but genre veterans of the horror world like myself will see Outlast as a test of their resolve and wits. The joy of Outlast doesn't necessarily come from playing it or even beating it, but from getting to say that I survived the game. Number 16, I have Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Even the lowest budget slasher films understand that much of the action in horror story is based on running. In real life, running away away from something is typically, if not sometimes unfairly, seen as an act of being a coward. In horror, running away is your first line of defense when faced with something too terrible to comprehend. Amnesia understands the relationship between running and horror better than many games released before it and after it, by depriving players of any real way to defend themselves. Amnesia not only turns running into an act of courage in a game where sound triggers monsters and traversing darkness blindly drives you insanely mad, but it showed that horror games no longer had to incorporate half-baked combat system to engage and scare the players. Number 15, I have Bioshock. Horror film fans often debate about what is and isn't horror. For instance, some may label Silence of the Lambs a horror while others call it a thriller. But there are also many others who simply find cause to enjoy everything that scares them regardless of the label. Maybe Bioshock doesn't typically receive the horror designation, but it's absolutely one of the most unnerving and effective examples of horror that you'll find in gaming. From its opening sequence, which quickly reveals the bloody aftermath of the madman's delusion, to its enthralling questions about the nature of control, Bioshock is genuinely terrifying when it needs to be. Bioshock may not run on nightmare fuels, but it uses the genre's best trick to propel its brilliant narrative and incredible world building. In number 14, I have F.E.A.R. F.E.A.R was released around the heights of the scary little girl era that really kicked into overdrive when The Ring became a surprisingly big hit in the US. Without a doubt, the ghastly little Alma remains one of the best uses of the creepy little girl trope in the gaming world. What's easy to forget though is that F.E.A.R was also an innovative action game that set a new standards for quality enemy AI in a first-person shooter. It's that combination of Western action and Eastern horror that only makes F.E.A.R a unique but kind of a horror gaming experience that finds a way to keep you on your toes while still letting you blast your way through rooms of enemies. In number 13, I have The Thing. Back in the early 2000s, it was easy to dismiss a licensed game meant to tie into the movies or TV shows, which is why you may never know that The Thing was ever adapted into a video game. But despite all of that, The Thing offers a truly innovative take on the horror gaming scene. Much like the film it's based on, The Thing's gameplay revolves around mistrust and isolation. You never really know which of your NPC companions is infected, but what's truly fascinating are the ways that the game makes you work to gain the trust and loyalty of those same characters who are also unsure whether you are who you say you are. Never knowing who is friend and who is foe makes for a truly unnerving experience to say the least, and there are few horror titles since then have come too close to replicating the terrors of The Thing's trust system. In number 12, I have The Suffering. Now picture this, you've just been sentenced to death row for a murder you're not entirely sure you committed. On your first night, the prison is invaded by a mysterious monsters of unknown origins. Against all odds, the worst place in the entire world somehow got even worse. The Suffering pulls off the considerable feat of being an action game that still manages to be terrifying as the most pure horror experiences out there. Like many of the games on this list, The Suffering's rough edges may have persuaded some of the gamers to initially ignore the game, but this game somehow manages to offer the best of mid-2000s horror and the best mid-2000s action gaming, without sacrificing the most irreplaceable qualities of either genres. In number 11, I have the 2014's PT. It sometimes feels like the drama surrounding PT, its stealth release, the involvement of Hideo Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, the cancellation of Silent Hills overshadowed the game itself. That's understandable, but when people talk about PT, the conversation should begin and end with how it may be the scariest piece of entertainment in any medium. The brilliance of PT lies in its ability to disorient the players no matter how many times they've navigated its labyrinth environment that somewhat invokes the maddening maze of Hellraiser 2's version of hell. Much like when you're having a nightmare that takes place in your own home, PT constantly finds a way to alter seemingly familiar surroundings until you feel so betrayed that you don't want to look around the next corner. It's that invocation of insanity that truly defines PT's horror moments. Even if the visuals of the game's ghost and disturbing occurrences are enough to leave you petrified, many have tried, but few other developers have come this close to replicating the pure fear that PT installs in those who ever are brave enough to play it. In number 10, I have Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. Confrontation only instills fear if you're not confident in the outcome. This is why many horror game creators often strip players of all forms of self-defense. After all, having a weapon with which you can repel and kill monsters inspires a sense of safety, or at least confirms that you have a fighting chance to survive to the end of the game. Fatal Frame 2 takes a different and a brilliant approach to confrontation and video game combat. The game arms you with a special camera that is able to ward off spirits. However though, the camera is only really effective if you're willing to get get uncomfortably close to the spirits and wait for your camera to indicate that you're getting an optimal shot. This kind of style of in-your-face combat combined with the grotesque designs of the spirits themselves means that you never feel confident in your ability to defend yourself, despite the fact that you're armed with the best possible weapons for your situation. The original Fatal Frame is actually pretty good, but the level and character designs of the Crimson Butterfly puts it over the top. In number 9, I have Alan Wake. Essentially gaming's finest unofficial Stephen King story, Alan Wake features many of the legendary horror writer's most notable tropes. There's a writer in a small rural town surrounded by woods and monsters who fed off the protagonist's own words. But this isn't just a copy and paste Stephen King video game homage. Developer Remedy Entertainment puts a real heart into the title's incredibly creepy story, which is complemented perfectly by the game's emphasis on lighting and shadows as well as its dreamlike atmosphere. Alan Wake is absolutely a love letter to the small town horrors most associated with Stephen King and Stephen Lynch, but the game's occasional winks to those storytelling masters do little to dilute the effectiveness of its best horror moments. In number 8, I have Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem. The best horror games are the ones that take full advantage of the unique abilities of the video game's medium. That isn't to say that a more cinematic video game experience can't be scary, but rather there's something special about horror games that explore what's possible when you're the one responsible for what happens. So far as that goes, few do it better than Eternal Darkness in my opinion. I really love Eternal Darkness's level design, century-spanning stories, and memorable cast of characters, but Eternal Darkness's sanity system is the reason why it's on the top of this list. As your protagonist loses their sanity through various in-game mechanics, the world around them is altered in fascinating ways. Statue heads follow them around, you can hear noises everywhere, the room shakes, the wall bleeds. Madness has really been depicted this effectively in a game since. However, the best moments come when the game makes players believe that all of their save datas have been deleted or that their GameCube somehow shuts itself off. Those moments of meta horror genuinely makes you question what's real and what's in your head. In number 7, I have Manhunt. The horrors of Manhunt isn't limited to the ways the game can scare you. This game's premise, environments, and intense stealth sequences are all exceptional, but we've all seen them elsewhere before. What makes Manhunt truly scary and terrifying is how it makes you feel when you play the game. In the game, you play as a contestant in someone else's preserved fantasy, one that forces you to reckon with your own humanity and just how far you'll go to survive. While you can simply kill the foes in your way or sometimes avoid them entirely, the game really entices you to commit increasingly brutal murders in order to get the best rewards. The slimy praises from the director of this interactive snuff film, the uncomfortable visuals of the kill itself, and the disturbing feeling of accomplishments you get from pulling off a truly brutal kill stays with you long after the traditional scares of the other games have faded away. I once called Manhunt a true grindhouse game. Well, much like the grindhouse films of the old. In my opinion, Manhunt will truly challenge your perceptions of what constitutes as entertainment. In number 6, I have Resident Evil Remake. Wait, no, not that remake. This remake. The original Resident Evil is a brilliant game. It forever changed our expectations of the video game horror genre and set a standard that is still used to measure the horror games to this day. However, the original Resident Evil pales in comparison to the greatness of its very own 2002 remake. Resident Evil's remake is more than just a series upgrade visuals, even if those are so good that the game somehow still looks incredible to this day. It was all about the Resident Evil's team's desire to make the game they wanted to make in 1996, but couldn't do due to technical restraints. That vision includes incredible visual scares, many of which are made possible by the cinematography of the game's fixed camera system, claustrophobic environments that feel like they're choking the life out of you, and even the presence of the Crimson Heads, a vicious mutation that may emerge if you don't kill properly a regular zombie. It embodies everything that is brilliant about the 90s survival horror classics while improving it in many ways that makes it feel so timeless that no matter when you play it, it doesn't matter, it's still a great game. The fact that this remake somehow makes Resident Evil more accessible and more terrifying is an accomplishment that can't be overstated. This truly, in my opinion, is the gold standards of video game remakes. In number 5, I have Soma. Given that Soma comes from the Frictional Games, the same team responsible for the revolutionary Amnesia: The Dark Descent, I probably don't have to tell you that yes, it's really scary. Yet the thing that really elevates Soma is the quality of its sci-fi storytelling. To simply put it into perspective, Soma features one of the best sci science fiction stories I've ever experienced in a video game. While this title explores concepts that you may have seen in certain films and TV shows and books, the way that frictional games forces you to endure this game's musings on fate, identity, and technology will haunt you forever. Honestly, this game's unforgettable ending is probably why I have it on my top 5. In number 4, I have Condemned Criminal Origins. Quietly released as part of the Xbox 360's launching lineup, there is a good chance that many of the gamers of that era overlooked this game in favor of titles like Perfect Dark Zero, Project Gotham Racing 3, and cameo elements of The Power. With that said, those who took a chance with this obscure horror title know it easily ranks amongst the scariest games ever made. The story of a federal investigator who is tasked with tracking down a series of serial killers. This game covers thematic grounds that we surprisingly don't see often in horror gaming. It's closer to a movie like Seven than the supernatural fare we typically get in horror games. However, it does prove to be a really perfect setup. The mindset and the motives of these serial killers often manifest themselves through the layers they inhabit. While none of the layers are really that terrifying as the department store where some of the mannequins are actually killers in disguise, the design of each area perfectly forces you to dive into the mind of some truly disturbing individuals in order to stop them. On top of that, Condemned sets a gold standards for first-person horror and first-person horror combat at a time when that concept was as rough as it's ever been. In my opinion, the great Resident Evil 7 owes more of its design pedigree to Condemned more than PT or the previous Resident Evil games. Yet this game may still be scarier than even its spiritual successors. And here we go with our top 3 horror games of all time. And again, I just want to preface this before we go through. This is just my opinion, and if you don't like my rankings, then let me know your top 20 video game horrors of all time. Alright, now let's go with our number 3 horror game, Darkwood. 2017 was an incredible year for gaming, so it's really no surprise that Darkwood flew under the radar during its initial release. Then again, we don't know many players who would willingly wade into this nightmare once they realize what it is. You wake up in Darkwood unsure of who you are, where you are, or what is happening. To survive its increasingly violent attacks, you must scrounge for supplies, defensive tools, and anything that will help you keep the lights on for another night. While those nighttime scenes are the sources of Darkwood's most memorable moments, it's those other times when you're wandering an endless dark forest looking for supplies that Darkwood instills a feeling of hopelessness in you that leaves you wondering how the hell are you going to make it. Survival has long been a core element of horror gaming, but when it comes to making you truly dread and dark and feel as if you're surviving against the impossible odds, Darkwood does it better than any game in recent memories. In number 2, I have System Shock 2. There's no shortage of great entries and stories in the sci-fi subgenre of evil computers hating humanity. There's even one such game on this list already, yet there are many reasons why System Shock 2 is considered gaming's greatest examples of that weirdly classic concept. At the risk of overusing the word, System Shock 2 is really one of the best examples of atmosphere in a video game. Nearly every area in this game successfully sells the idea that you've been transported to a space station filled with sci-fi terrors that border on the supernatural. The worst thing about how easy it is to lose yourself in this game is the fact that you soon discover a world you most certainly do not want to be lost in. It's almost cruel that this game is as good as it is. Games that are this unnerving shouldn't feel this good. And in my number 1 list of horror games of all time, I have Alien's Isolation. There have been very good Alien games in the past, but there was a long time when the dream of that horror game that captured everything that made the original Alien great felt like it was destined to remain a dream. That is until Alien's Isolation realized the potential of that concept so completely that it almost made it easy to forget that the isolation is something of a dream game. Whereas so many other Alien games are happy to treat the xenomorphs as cannon fodders, Alien Isolation treats the creatures as an apex predator back into a corner in an unfamiliar environment. One xenomorph can easily be the star of one of the scariest horror games ever made. Familiarity can dull the edge of any great horror films, and a series of Alien movies and adaptations have made it all too easy to forget how scary the xenomorphs really are. This game pulls off the minor miracle of making that creature feel just as, if not more, terrifying than they did in the 1979 film. I think the best part about this game, in my opinion, is Amanda Ripley's voice actress. Talk about a fucking phenomenal job voicing a video game character. She was perfect. She truly felt like a real person. It was believable and grounded in reality. Nothing I hate more than a really stiff, bland voice acting in video games. I mean, I could understand it in the 90s, but not in this day and age. When Amanda was in a scary situation in the game, the voice actress sounded believably terrified. When Amanda was angry in the game, the voice actress sounded like she was really fucking furious hilarious and it sounded totally authentic. I was completely hooked right away with Amanda as the main character. Awesome character design, awesome voice acting. She's not a Mary Sue, but she's not a damsel in distress either, and I wish more games would do their female protagonists like Ripley Jr. in this game. She's gonna go down as one of my favorite female video game characters ever, or probably one of my favorite female protagonists ever. She's right up there with Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, female Commander Shepard, Ellie from The Last of Us, Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII, Seamus of course, and so many other great female characters. So there you go with my top 20 horror games of all time, and again, this is just my own opinion and my own personal list. So I do hope you guys can respect my choices, and again, if you disagree with my rankings, then let me know your top 20 horror games of all time and we can have a really healthy discussion about it. Alright, and I just want to say thank you guys so much for helping my channel reach 100 subs. It means a lot to me, and hopefully we can hit 100k in the future, and I hope you guys could join me as this channel and I grow together, and I hope you guys can witness it with me because it would mean the world to me. So yeah, I hope you guys are having a spooky Halloween, and as always, this has been Yorinchi signing off, and I'll see you soon on the next video. Stay safe, guys.